Everybody is talking about it. You would think there is no longer any pandemic anywhere on the globe because all everyone seems to care about is that bombshell interview of Meghan and Harry with Queen Oprah. That's it. I'm not here to dissect the interview. I'm not to give my views on the interview, but I want to share with you something that has struck me over the last few days with all the commentaries and all the discussions about what happened. And it's this. Many years ago, I remember reading a piece by Rabbi Yitzhak Rubin. Rabbi Rubin was somebody who was an American rabbi, who'd moved to the UK and become a Rav in South Manchester, someone I got to know very well during my student years. Fantastic, inspiring speaker, and really, really touched and moved so many of the students who lived in South Manchester. And he wrote a piece discussing his moving from America to England and him noticing the differences between American Jewry and Anglo Jewry. And the major difference, which is clear to see, is our affiliations. In America, you have maybe, certainly in those days, 10% were affiliated to Orthodoxy. The vast majority were affiliated to Reform, Conservative, and other streams of Judaism. Whereas in this country, at the time and still today, close to 70% of the community affiliated to Orthodoxy. It's a radically different model. And of course, he also noted that in the American model, assimilation was rife at 50+%, and the UK at the time was still relatively low in sort of in the 20s. And now that gap's grown even more. Yes, our intermarriage has risen slightly over the last sort of 30 years, but America, it's skyrocketed. And he had a theory why these Jewries were different and what kept Anglo Jewry much more traditional, much more orthodox, much more part of that world than America. And what did he say? It's because we have a monarchy. Because Britain has the Queen and the King going back years and years and years, it instills into the country a sense of tradition, a sense of there's a melech, there's a malka, a sense of authority, a sense of a higher power to a certain extent. And he said that that is absent from America, and that's why America has gone its course in terms of Judaism, whereas in the UK, it hasn't. And what's fascinating is take his theory, it works across the world. The Commonwealth countries, where they recognize the Queen as the Melech, as the Malka, as the monarch, Australia, South Africa, Canada, again, those countries, Orthodoxy is the dominant denomination within Judaism, and assimilation rates are much lower than in America. It's fascinating. But I want to take a little bit further, because what's that got to do with Meghan and Harry, and what's it got to do with Vayakhel and Pekudei? And the answer is this. I watched an interview about this with Candace Owens. Candace Owens is a American conservative commentator, and she spoke about the Meghan and Harry interview in a very interesting way. She said the following, and she said this after the interview on, I can't remember what night it was. She said, I have never had an appreciation for the royal family. It's just something that Americans don't really jive with. It never made sense to me. Remember, she's an American. But I fell in love and married an Englishman. So I kind of learned to appreciate the significance of the Queen and really understood that there's been something in that country, the UK, that has remained solid and has not changed over time. It's difficult for Americans to comprehend that because we don't really do tradition. It's fascinating. An understanding on nothing to do with Judaism, but on a secular countrywide level, that Americans, she's saying that she, as an American, Americans don't get tradition in the way that the UK does, in the way that the Commonwealth does. And in terms of Torah, in terms of Masorah, in terms of Orthodoxy, that's huge. Because we have a royal family in the Jewish religion, but only one being is part of that royal family, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this week in Vayakhel Pekudei, we see the construction of the Mishkan, of the house that we have built for Hashem to dwell. The Shekhinah will dwell in the Mishkan. And when you look at the instructions, both in Truma Tetzava and in Vayakhel Pekudei, incredibly detailed in terms of the materials, in terms of the dimensions, in terms of everything that is put into building the Mishkan. Why? Because there's a message. The message is, in order to connect with me as Hashem, in order to understand and relate to me and respect me, there's a way of doing things, an exact way of doing things that I'm commanding you to do. And we understand within Torah that that is what it means to be a Jew, to follow the traditions, to follow the laws, to follow the ordinances passed down for thousands of years. Meghan wasn't just coming into a different country with a different culture. She was coming to the heart of that country and the heart of that culture with traditions going back thousands of years. It's not only difficult, it's almost impossible for anybody to be able to do that. But the lessons for us as Jews, I think, are paramount. To understand what it means to have to connect to our royal family, to connect and to be part of a Judaism that respects tradition and respects the idea that, you know what, I may not keep it all, but I understand what underpins this whole procedure. We know in this country and across the Commonwealth, many people are members of shuls. They may only come 2-3 times a year, but that's the Judaism they subscribe to. They understand that that tradition, that's the orthodoxy that their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, going all the way back, that's what they did. We don't need to update it. We don't need to change it. Obviously, we need to live it in the 21st century, but in terms of the basic halacha. And they understand that they may not keep it yet, but they understand that. And Vayakhel Pekudei will always have, for me and for so many of us, a very personal connection. Why? It was the first Shabbat of lockdown last year. Vayakhel Pekudei was the first parasha we didn't lane in shul, that we laned at home. And I remember sitting there that Shabbat, obviously upset about what was happening in the world and worried and concerned. But there we were, my wife and my 2 kids and I, sitting and laning. I laned, my kids laned, my wife gave it to our Torah. We could do that. We could engage with the Torah of the king, with the document of the king. Why? Because that's how we'd been raised. That's how we'd been brought up, in a traditional Orthodox way. And it allowed us to connect. Unfortunately, in America, with most of American Jewry, they can't connect anymore. They don't have the ability. They're not part of a system that's connected for thousands of years. They don't do tradition, as Candace Owens says. Obviously, we understand within America there's a vibrant and vastly growing Orthodox world, and it is literally dominating American Jewry and will do so for the next decades because of the growth of it and the unfortunate intermarriage of the other side. But to understand what is happening in terms of the Harry-Meghan thing and the American-British thing, how Americans are all behind Meghan and the Brits are mainly behind the Queen, because the Americans don't understand what it is to be part of the royal family. They don't understand what is a royal family. Well, again, I'm not here to judge rights and wrongs. I'm just here to understand how we look at it. That we as British people, not just Jews, but British people, understand this idea of tradition, understand this idea of connecting something that's going back thousands of years. Rabbi Rubin was correct. I believe that is why here in the UK and the Commonwealth, we are still connected to Orthodoxy in a real and meaningful way, whereas our American cousins, unfortunately, lost their way. And that's why in our country, we still have a strong foundation to make sure we can connect people to Judaism gradually throughout our shuls. But in America, as one famous American rabbi said, it's a Noah's Ark of Orthodoxy in a sea of assimilation. For that we weep. We understand what we have to do here in our country to make sure that Judaism can survive and thrive. Shabbat Shalom.